The man with the sapphire ring didn't knock. He didn't need to. 3 men in dark coats pushed through the door of Amara's apartment at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and the first thing they did was overturn her kitchen table. Not because they were looking for something underneath it, because they wanted her to understand, immediately, and without confusion, that nothing in that apartment belonged to her anymore. The one with the ring stood in the doorway and watched her back against the wall. He was calm the way. Very dangerous men are calm not because nothing was happening, but because whatever was happening didn't concern him emotionally. He tilted his head slightly, looked at her the way you look at a door you're about to walk through. "You found something that wasn't yours," he said. "I need it back." Amara's hands were shaking. She didn't know what he was talking about. That was the part that made it worse. She had no idea what she had stumbled into. But they didn't believe that. And now she was running through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago at midnight with a bullet in her left side and a silver pendant clutched in her fist. The only thing she'd grabbed on the way out the window, while somewhere behind her, the man with the sapphire ring was sending more men after her. If you've ever been afraid of something you couldn't name, you already understand exactly how Amara felt in that moment. If you haven't, stay with this story. Because what happens next will change how you think about who gets to decide who you are. Before we go further, if you're new here, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. You don't want to miss what's coming. Hit the like button and drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the night that changed everything. 24 hours before Amara Winslow collapsed into the arms of a man she'd never met. She was refilling a coffee cup she'd already refilled twice. The customer at table 7, Harold 63, retired postal worker, decaf with 2 sugars, and never cream, hadn't actually asked for more. But Amara refilled it anyway. But Amara had been sitting because Harold had been sitting in that same booth since 7:30 in the morning, and he hadn't said a word to anybody, and she recognized the particular quality of his silence. It was the kind of silence that didn't want to be left alone. "You eaten today?" she asked. Harold looked up. Then he looked back down at his cup. "Had some crackers." Amara went and got him a bowl of soup. Didn't ask. Didn't charge him for it either, which meant it was coming out of her tips, which was fine. Tips at the diner were inconsistent on weekdays, and she'd learned to budget around the gaps. That was Amara's life. Not glamorous, not dramatic. Deliberately, carefully, stubbornly ordinary. She was 25 years old, and she had been constructing her ordinariness for years, the way other people construct ambition, with intention and daily effort, and a clear sense of what she was trying to achieve. She knew every regular customer's order. She knew which booths had a draft from the busted seal on the front window, and she seated older customers away from it without being asked. She kept her apartment clean, her bills current, her social media non-existent. She had 3 friends, 2 of whom she'd met at the library, and she called her neighbor Mrs. Pietka on Sundays to make sure the woman's arthritis wasn't flaring too badly to open her medication bottles. She was not hiding, exactly. She just wasn't trying to be found. The distinction mattered to her, though she couldn't have told you precisely why. There was something at the back of her memory that had always made her cautious, a feeling more than a fact, a weight she carried, without knowing what it was attached to. She'd grown up with the Winslows, a quiet family in South Shore, who had treated her with consistent, practical kindness. They hadn't explained much about her early childhood. She hadn't pushed for explanations. The feeling was easier to carry when she didn't examine it too directly. She got off her shift at 4 in the afternoon, walked home, took the long way along West Fulton because the trees there were starting to turn, and she liked the color of them in the late afternoon. That was when she found the notebook. It was lying against the base of a streetlight outside, an old converted warehouse. A squat brick building with blackened windows, and a chain-link fence that was technically locked, but actually just looped with a cable someone had cut and re-looped to look intact. The notebook was black leather, the size of a paperback, with no label on the cover and no markings on the spine. Amara stopped, looked at it, looked around. There was nobody visible on the street in either direction. She should have left it. She knew in that particular gut-level way that quietly careful people develop over years of careful living, that she should have left it. She picked it up. The pages inside were dense, columns of numbers, dates going back years, names she didn't recognize. Some of the pages had small photographs attached with paper clips, pictures of people who looked like they were taken without the subject's knowledge. Candid angles, blurred edges. The photographs were old, some of them. The dates in the margins suggested some of this material stretched back nearly 2 decades. She was still standing on the sidewalk reading when she heard the car. It wasn't that the car was moving fast. It was that it had slowed down. Specifically, deliberately, it had slowed down right beside her, and then it stayed there idling, while she stood with the notebook open in her hands. Amara closed the notebook. She didn't look at the car. She put the notebook in her bag and walked. She kept her pace even. Her heart was doing something erratic and unhelpful behind her sternum, and she breathed through it the way you breathe through pain, consciously, one breath at a time, not letting it run away from you. The car followed her for 4 blocks. Then it stopped. She didn't hear it anymore. She turned a corner, walked another block, and by the time she'd reached her building, she had almost convinced herself it was coincidence. The pendant was hanging from her door handle, silver old, the crest on it, worn almost smooth. She had never seen it before in her life. And yet, and this was the part she couldn't explain to herself standing in the hallway, with her keys still in her hand, it produced in her an immediate and acute sensation of recognition. Not the pendant itself, necessarily, the feeling it gave her. The weight of it when she lifted it off the handle. Something in her body knew this object before her mind did. She took it inside. She turned it over. She held it under the lamp on her desk and looked at the crest until her eyes ached. She was still sitting there with it when the knock came at 11:47. 3 knocks. Unhurried. She thought it was Mrs. Pietka, and she got up without checking the peephole because that was a habit she'd gotten careless about, and it was one of the very few careless things about her, and it turned out to be the thing that cost her. The door opened, and the men were already inside before she'd fully registered that the face on the other side of it wasn't Mrs. Pietka's. The one with the ring didn't rush. That was what she remembered later, that he seemed like a man who had never needed to rush in his life, because everything eventually arrived at him on his terms. He was white-haired, 50s, wore his money with the practiced casualness of someone who'd had it long enough that it stopped interesting him. The sapphire on his right hand caught the light from her overhead lamp and threw a brief blue flash across the wall. "You found something that wasn't yours," he said. "I need it back. I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. The notebook. He glanced at her bag, which was still on the kitchen counter. "We saw you pick it up. We'd like it back. And then this can end very simply. Who's we?" He didn't answer that. He looked at her the way you look at something that has asked an irrelevant question. A sound like green One of the men behind him moved toward her bag. Amara moved at the same moment the bag away from it, toward the window that opened onto the fire escapes, and she had it open before the nearest man reached her. His hand caught her left side as she was going through, and she felt something sharp and terrible. And then she was on the fire escape, and he was shouting something behind her. And then she was falling down the iron stairs, 3 steps at a time with her hand pressed against her side, and the pendant still in her fist because she'd grabbed it off the desk on instinct, without knowing why. She hit the street and ran. For the first 40 minutes she was functional. The adrenaline handled the pain. She moved fast, stayed in the shadows, changed direction 4 times, cut through an alley behind a restaurant, and then through a parking structure, and then along a stretch of train yard fencing where the lights were blown out. She was bleeding. She knew she was bleeding. She kept her hand pressed against it and kept moving. At the hour mark, she was less functional. At the hour and 15, she was mostly following instinct through streets that were blurring at the edges. The rain had come sometime in the last half hour, and she was soaked through and shaking with cold on top of everything else. She was in the warehouse district. She didn't know exactly how she'd gotten there. The streets were empty, the way streets get empty, very late at night, in industrial areas not absent of people, but stripped of any sense that people were something that happened here. She saw the headlights and walked into them because she couldn't think of anything better to do. The car stopped. A door opened. She had time to register that the man getting out of the passenger side was large and dark-suited and looked at her with an expression she hadn't expected. Not alarm exactly, not annoyance, but something more like the focused calculation of someone whose mind moves faster than his face does, and then her legs went, and she went with them. He caught her before she hit the pavement. His hands were strong, and the grip was impersonal. And then he was saying something to her in a low voice, and she couldn't quite organize the words into meaning. But the tone of them was not threatening, and she thought, this is not one of his men. She didn't know why she thought that. She thought it anyway. She opened her fist, pushed the pendant into his hand, felt him go still. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't that quality of absolute stillness, like a man who has just heard a sound from a room he thought was empty. Don't let the man with the blue ring find me, she said. Then she stopped being conscious. Kwon Jae-hyun looked at the pendant in his palm for a long moment in the rain. Around him, his security detail was moving with the efficient quiet of men who had handled unexpected situations before. One of them was already speaking into an earpiece. Another had moved the car. They were professionals, and they were waiting for instruction, and Jae-hyun was aware of this, and he was not giving instruction yet because he was looking at the pendant. 28 years. He had not seen this crest in 28 years, and the last time he had seen it was in a cedar chest in his father's study that had been locked with a key. His father kept on a chain around his neck and never explained. Jae-hyun had been 12 years old, and he had asked his father what was in the chest. Once, and Daisuke looked at him with an expression he would spend the next 3 decades trying to correctly interpret. Not yet, his father had said. That was all. Not yet. Dae-sung had been dead for 11 years. The chest Jae-hyun had opened it after the funeral. He'd expected documents, business records, the kind of organized history a man like his father would leave behind. What he found instead was a collection of objects whose connections he couldn't trace and a set of handwritten notes in a cipher he'd never broken. He'd eventually put everything back and locked the chest again, because some questions had been waiting long enough that forcing them felt wrong. He looked at the young woman his men were carefully lifting toward the car. He looked at the pendant. The estate, he said, not the hospital. His security chief, Seo Min-kyu, appeared at his shoulder. Min-kyu was 42 and had been with Jae-hyun since before either of them was anyone important. He had a gift for expressing very precise skepticism with very minimal facial movement. She needs a hospital. She needs ours, Jae-hyun said. Call Dr. Yoon. Tell him to come to the estate now. Min-kyu looked at the woman, looked at Jae-hyun, made the specific calculation that Jae-hyun was not going to change his mind and moved to make the call. In the car, Amara's breathing was shallow but regular. Someone had put a folded jacket under her head, and someone else was applying pressure to her side with what looked like a first aid compress from the emergency kit Jae-hyun required all his vehicles to carry. He sat across from her and watched her face in the passing streetlight and held the pendant and tried to understand what he was looking at. The crest. The same crest. He turned it over. The reverse was plain silver, except for a faint line of text he had to hold at an angle to the window light to read. The text said, "Remember who you choose to be." Jae-hyun sat with that for a moment. Then his phone buzzed. Min-kyu from the front seat. "We have a visitor at the gate," Min-kyu said. "He arrived while we were en route." He asked for the woman by name. What name did he give? A pause. Amara Winslow. Jae-hyun looked at the woman unconscious on the seat across from him. Then at the pendant. Description, he said. White hair. Older. My man at the gate says there's a distinctive ring. Blue stone. Jae-hyun's hand closed around the pendant. Tell him she's not here, he said. Tell him we have no one by that name. And then record every detail you can about whoever he came with and whatever vehicle they used, and send it to me. Min-kyu was quiet for a beat. He's going to know we're lying. Yes, Jae-hyun said, he is, Doctor. Yoon was 61 and perpetually irritable at being woken up, and he handled Amara's wound with the competent gracefulness of someone who had been patching people up outside of official channels for long enough that he'd stopped being bothered by the circumstances. The bullet had gone through cleanly. No major vessels. Significant blood loss, tissue damage, and she was going to be limited in mobility for weeks, but she was not in immediate danger provided the wound stayed clean. He said all of this to Jae-hyun, standing in the doorway of the guest suite, voice low, while the estate's household staff settled the room. She needs rest, Yoon said. Real rest, several days at minimum. She'll have it. Yoon gave him the look of a man who had known him long enough to doubt several things simultaneously. Does she know where she is? Not yet. Does she have anyone I should contact? Jae-hyun thought about the pendant, about the man at the gate who knew her name. about a cedar chest he hadn't opened in 11 years. "Not yet," he said. He sat in the chair outside her door while the estate settled into its nighttime quiet. Through the tall window at the end of the hall, he could see the rain still moving across the city lights. He turned the pendant over in his fingers. The crest was worn, but it was definitely the same he'd spent enough time as a boy staring at the contents of that locked chest to have the symbol memorized. The specific geometry of it, the way the lines intersected at the center. He had never known what it meant. He was beginning to think his father had gone to considerable lengths to make sure he didn't know until the right moment. Min-kyu came down the hall at 2 in the morning with a tablet and the precise expression of a man who has been awake too long and has found something he wishes he hadn't. She has a social security number, a driver's license, a work history, 3 previous addresses, and 2 credit cards that have never been delinquent, Min-kyu said. But every single record we can find originates 12 years ago. Min-kyu turned the tablet so Jae-hyun could see the timeline his team had constructed. Before that, nothing. No birth certificate we can authenticate. No school records. No medical history. No photographs in any system we've been able to access. She exists completely and consistently and verifiably from age 13 onward. Jae-hyun looked at the screen, and before 13, Amara Winslow did not legally exist, Min-kyu said. Jae-hyun thought about that. About a 12-year-old girl who had been given a complete and carefully constructed life. About the kind of infrastructure that required. About the kind of people who could build it. About his father's foundation. He looked at the pendant. He didn't say what he was thinking yet. "There's something else," Min-kyu said. He swiped to a different screen. "This arrived at the gate about an hour ago. Physical envelope. No return. The guard said the person who delivered it was a woman, older, on foot, and was gone before he could get a good look. The envelope contained a single photograph. A 6-year-old black girl at an abandoned train station. Bright red umbrella. Head tilted slightly back, as if she'd just stopped looking at something above her. The photograph was old, the colors washed toward the warm end of the spectrum, the way photographs from that era did. Around her neck, visible even at that angle and resolution, was a silver pendant. The same one. Jae-hyun turned the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting he did not recognize, was a set of numbers. Coordinates. Min-kyu had already run them. He pulled up the map on the tablet without being asked. North Halsted Station. An abandoned rail terminal on the north edge of the warehouse district. It had been closed for nearly 20 years. Officially, it was tied up in some kind of historical preservation dispute. Unofficially, it was a building that sat untouched because nobody had ever filed the right paperwork to either tear it down or repurpose it, and nobody seemed sufficiently motivated to correct this. "Have someone go and look at it," Jae-hyun said. "External observation only. I want to know what's there." Min-kyu nodded and went. Jae-hyun looked at the photograph for a long time. The girl's expression was unreadable, not afraid, not happy, just present, the way very young children are present, fully occupying whatever moment they're in without commentary. He looked at the pendant in his hand. He thought about his father's letter. He thought about a locked chest and the word "not yet." Down the hall, behind the closed door, Amara Winslow was sleeping under the care of a doctor in the house of a man she had never met, in a city that was still washing itself clean in the rain. She had pressed a piece of her unknown past into the hands of the one person in Chicago whose unknown past might already contain the answer. Neither of them knew that yet. But Jae-hyun was beginning to feel the shape of it, the outline of a thing too large to see all at once. Something his father had started building 28 years ago and had apparently decided only this specific moment would be right for finishing. He was not someone who frightened easily. He had aside the shadows of this city through a combination of intelligence and the willingness to act when other men hesitated. He had absorbed betrayals that would have broken organizations twice the size of his. He had sat across tables from dangerous men and waited them out with a patience that was not natural to him, but that he had worked very hard to cultivate. He was, at 2:15 in the morning, with a stranger's photograph in his hand and a 28-year-old mystery suddenly reopening in his chest, genuinely unsettled. He found he wasn't entirely sure whether that was a bad thing. His phone buzzed again. "Min-kyu, your man at the estate gate is reporting that the vehicle that came for her tonight has been circling the block for the last 40 minutes. Jae-hyun looked at the door at the end of the hall. "Keep the watch doubled," he said. "Nobody in or out of the estate without my direct authorization. And Min-kyu, yes, find out who owns North Halstead Station. Go back as far as you need to go. I want the full ownership history." A pause that meant Min-kyu was already thinking ahead of the question. "You think it connects to your father?" It wasn't quite a question. "I think," Jae-hyun said carefully, "that my father spent a very long time making sure something happened at exactly the right moment. And I think that moment is right now." He looked at the pendant one more time. "Put it in his pocket, so yes. Go back as far as you need to go." Amara woke up not knowing where she was, which was not new, but woke up not knowing where she was in a room that cost more than her monthly rent, which was, the ceiling was high. Real plaster, not the drop-ceiling tile she'd been looking at for 3 years in her apartment on South Paulina. The light coming through the curtains was gray and diffuse morning, but early, the kind of early that hadn't committed to itself yet. She was in a bed with actual weight to it, the kind of mattress that held you rather than just stopped you from hitting the floor. There was an IV line in her left arm and a tight professional dressing around her midsection, and when she tried to sit up, her body sent her a very clear message about what it thought of that plan. She stopped, breathed, took inventory. Left side on fire, but a managed fire. Someone had dealt with it competently. She was wearing clothes that weren't hers, soft cotton, clean, slightly too large. The pendant was gone from her hand. That sent a cold spike through her chest. Before she saw it on the nightstand, coiled on top of a folded piece of cloth, and the spike subsided into something more like a tremor. She was alive. She was indoors. She was not in a hospital. Those 3 facts needed to be held together carefully. The door opened before she'd finished holding them. The man who came in wasn't the one from the street. This one was shorter, more compact, with the kind of watchful stillness that he'd spent a lot of time in rooms where watching and being still were survival requirements. He had a tablet under his arm, and he looked at her the way you look at a variable that has changed value unexpectedly. "You're awake," he said. "Where am I?" "Safe." That's not an answer. He pulled a chair from the corner and sat down with the economical movement of someone who does not waste physical effort. "It's the only answer I have authorization to give you right now." "How's the pain?" "Manageable." She looked at the IV line. "What is that?" "Fluids, antibiotics, Dr. Yoon's orders." "Who's Dr. Yoon?" "The man who kept you from bleeding out on the floor of a guest suite at 3 in the morning." He set the tablet on his knee. "My name is Seo Min-kyu. I handle security for the man who brought you here." Amara looked at him steadily. "And who is that?" Min-kyu looked back at her with the same steadiness. "Someone who would like to ask you some questions. When you're ready." "I'm ready now." He didn't move. "You were shot 12 hours ago. I noticed." She pushed herself up against the headboard, slowly managing the pain with concentrated breath. "I'd still like to talk to whoever's in charge. I'd like to know what happened to the man at the gate." That made Min-kyu go very still in a different way. "How do you know about the man at the gate?" "I told the man who caught me about him. Blue ring. He would have sent someone to check." She watched Min-kyu's face. "I'm guessing he came. I'm guessing he asked for me. I'm guessing whoever I'm talking to said no, and now we're all in a complicated situation." Min-kyu looked at her for a long moment. "I'll get him," he said. Jae-hyun had been awake since before she woke up. He'd slept perhaps 90 minutes in the chair in his study, and then he'd given up on it and spent the remaining hours going through his father's archived files, which Min-kyu's team had retrieved from encrypted storage at his direction. A sound green 11 years of not touching them, and now he was sitting here at 5 in the morning with financial records and private correspondence spread across his trying to find the thread. He found it at 6:47. A single line item in a Kwon Foundation charitable disbursement record from 18 years ago. A transfer to a legal services organization that no longer appeared to exist for an amount that was unremarkable on its own, but that was repeated quarterly for 7 years with the consistency of something that had been set up to run automatically and then quietly forgotten. The organization's listed purpose was child welfare services. Its last registered address was a building 2 blocks from North Halstead Station. Jae-hyun sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about his father, a man who had been many things, some of them things Jae-hyun had trying to metabolize without being destroyed by them, but who had also been, underneath everything, Someone who maintained a precise private moral accounting that he rarely explained to anyone. Protect the girl until she remembers who she was. Never let anyone choose her name again. He hadn't found those words yet. They'd come later, from a sealed letter he didn't know existed. A sound like green wood toward them, but he was already moving toward them, feeling the outline of them in the document spread across his desk, before Min-kyu's knock brought him back to the present. She's awake. She wants to talk to you. Jae-hyun looked at his watch. Then at the financial record on the screen. How is she? Alert. More alert than she should be. A pause. She knew about the man at the gate, figured it out herself in about 45 seconds. Jae-hyun closed the laptop. I'll come. The room felt different with him in it. That was the first thing Amara registered, not threat, exactly, but density. The sense of a person whose presence displaced more air than the physical space they occupied would suggest. He was tall, broader than she'd registered on the street, and he carried himself with the specific self-possession of someone who had done enough dangerous things that danger had stopped costing him much in the way of visible anxiety. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her on the street, that focused, rapid calculation, taking inventory without appearing to. He sat down in the chair Min-kyu had vacated. He put the pendant on the bed between them. Then he waited. Amara looked at the pendant, looked at him. You recognized it? Yes. From where? That's a longer answer. He laced his fingers together. His hands were steady. My name is Kwon Jae-hyun. You're in my estate in Lincoln Park. The man who came to the gate last night is gone. We logged his vehicle, and the plates are registered to a shell company that I'm having traced. You are not in danger here. He looked at the pendant. Will you tell me where you got that? It was on my door. She watched his face. Someone left it on my door handle. Same night I found the notebook. What? Notebook, she told him. She told him carefully, the way she told stories, not all at once, but in the order things had happened, with the specific details that mattered, and without the ones that didn't, because Amara had learned a long time ago that imprecision in storytelling was a form of imprecision in thinking, and she couldn't afford either. She told him about the converted warehouse, and the leather notebook, and the black car that had followed her home. She told him about the men at her apartment, and the one with the ring, and what he'd said about the notebook. She told him about the window and the fire escape, and running for an hour and 15 minutes through the rain. Jae-hyun listened, without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. The notebook, he said. Where is it now? My bag. Which I'm assuming is... Here, Min-kyu from the doorway had it in his hand. He looked at Jae-hyun, who nodded, and he brought it in and set it on the foot of the bed. Amara reached for it. The movement pulled at her side, and she stopped and controlled the pain and reached again, slower. She got the notebook out of the bag and held it for a moment. I don't know what's in it, she said. Not really. I didn't have time to read it properly. May I look? She handed it to him. Jae-hyun opened it. His expression remained controlled as he turned the pages, but there was something happening behind it. She watched him the way she'd learned to watch people at the diner, the small involuntary adjustments that said more than the things people meant to show. His jaw tightened slightly at something on the third page. His eyes stilled on something further in. He turned back 2 pages and read something again. Then he closed the notebook and put it on his knee and sat there for a moment. You understand that these men are going to continue looking for you, he said. Yes. Staying here with me is not a neutral choice. I have enemies. Being connected to me creates specific risks. I know what you are. She said it directly, without edge. Just stating a fact the way you state facts. I figured that out around the time I saw your security detail in this house. I'm not confused about what kind of protection I'm Sasinskin for. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not softened, exactly recalibrated. Then you understand why I need to know who you are, he said. Not the name, the rest of it. Whatever is in your past that made those men send 4 people to your apartment in the middle of the night. Amara looked at the pendant on the bed between them. I don't know, she said. That's the problem. Before I was 13, there are things I can't remember. Not suppressed, not hidden, just gone. Like a section of wall where the plaster's been taken off. You can see the lath underneath, but there's nothing to hold on to. Jae-hyun said nothing. The pendant does something, she said, when I hold it. Not memory exactly. More like the feeling memory leaves behind. Like standing in a room where something happened before you arrived. He looked at her carefully. What kind of feeling? She thought about how to say it. A train station. Not a specific one I can name. Just the feeling of one, the smell of it, the sound. Cold, two of us, not one. Someone saying, don't let anyone choose your name. The quality of Jae-hyun's stillness changed. Amara noticed. What? He looked at the pendant, then at her. He reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the bed beside the pendant, a photograph, old color gone warm with age. She looked at it. The girl in the photograph was 6, maybe 7. Black girl in a dark coat with a red umbrella, at what looked like a train station, and around her neck. Amara's hand moved before she decided to move it. She picked up the photograph. Her chest did something she didn't have a word for, not recognition, not memory. Something prior to both of those. Something animal and immediate and completely outside her control. Where did you get this? Her voice came out different than she intended. It was delivered to my gate last night, he said. In an envelope. No sender, that's me. I know. She looked up at him. How do you know? The pendant. He nodded at the photograph. And because your documented life begins 12 years ago. Before age 13, Amara Winslow didn't legally exist. The room went very quiet. Amara set the photograph down with careful precision, the way you put down something fragile when your hands aren't steady. She did not let her face do what it wanted to do. She had been controlling her face in difficult moments since she was old enough to understand that faces were information, and information could be used against you. And she controlled it now. Say that again, she said. My team spent last night pulling every record connected to your identity. Everything checks out. It's clean, consistent, professionally built. But the oldest document in the chain is 12 years old. There's no trail before that. Someone constructed your identity and did it well enough that it held for 12 years. But they built it with a start date. Before 13, he paused. Before 13, you didn't exist on paper. Amara breathed. In, out. She looked at the photograph, at the pendant. The foundation that funded the construction of my identity, she said slowly. Who ran it? Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment. We're still tracing the exact connection. But preliminary, he stopped. Tell me. The Kwon Family Foundation, he said. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Your family, she said. My father, he said. He died 11 years ago. I took over what he built. I didn't know. I want to be clear that I didn't know about this. But your family funded the identity of a little girl who had no documented existence before age 13. She looked at him steadily. Not angry, not yet. Processing. And now that little girl is in your house, and men with a sapphire ring are looking for her, and you recognized the pendant she was carrying. Yes, he said. And you don't think that's worth being angry about? I think it's worth understanding before anyone gets angry about it, he said, which requires that you stay alive long enough to understand it. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away at the window, at the gray Chicago morning assembling itself outside. What's on the back of the photograph? She said. There's something on the back. Jae-hyun turned it over. Coordinates. Of where? North Halsted Station. He watched her face. It's been closed for nearly 20 years. Abandoned. Her hands went still on the blanket. The train station feeling. Cold air and iron, and the sound of something enormous moving through the dark. I've been there, she said. Not a question. I think so. She turned back to him. I want to go. Min-kyu found out about it in the kitchen at 8:15 when Jae-hyun came down for coffee and told him, and Min-kyu's response was to set his own coffee down with the precise, deliberate placement of someone trying very hard not to throw it. She was shot less than 16 hours ago, Min-kyu said. I know. She has a wound in her side that Dr. Yoon said needs. I know what Yoon said. And you're planning to take her to an abandoned train station because she felt a feeling. Jae-hyun looked at him. The coordinates were sent to us deliberately. Someone wants us to go there, which is exactly why we shouldn't. Min-kyu's voice had the controlled force of a man who was being professionally careful about not raising it. That's how people into situations. You give them a location. You create a reason for them to feel like they have to go, and you control the ground when they arrive. I know how it works. Do you? Because right now you're looking at this woman who showed up in your headlights with your father's crest on a chain, and you're not thinking the way you think. Min-kyu stopped himself. I've worked for you for 18 years. I know when you're off balance. Jae-hyun put his coffee cup down. Looked at it. She's not a play, he said. She's not someone's asset. She's a woman who had her entire existence erased before she was a teenager, and someone just told her that my family did it. Your father did it. Same thing in the eyes of most people. Not in mine. Min-kyu picked up his coffee again. In my eyes, you're the man who's been running a cleaner operation than your father for a decade, and I'd like you to still be alive and out of federal custody by the end of this week. He looked at his cup. At minimum, let me send a team first. Eyes on the location before we commit to anything. I already told you to do that last night. They went at 4 this morning. External perimeter only, per your instructions. He pulled out his phone and brought up a message. This is what they sent back. Jae-hyun took the phone. The image on the screen was grainy pre-dawn, low light, taken from a distance with a telephoto. North Halsted Station exterior. The building was dark, windows boarded. In front of the main entrance, barely visible, was a shape, a person. Young woman from the posture, standing still. She was holding something. Jae-hyun enlarged the image. Red umbrella. He looked at Min-kyu. She was there at 4 in the morning, Min-kyu said. Standing in front of a closed building in the rain with a red umbrella. My team observed her for 11 minutes. She didn't move. Then she went inside through a service door on the east side and didn't come back out in the time they were there. Jae-hyun handed the phone back. Someone is orchestrating this, Min-kyu said. Whoever sent that photograph, whoever left the pendant on her door, they know exactly what they're doing. They are moving pieces. You and that woman upstairs are 2 of the pieces. I need you to understand that before you decide to walk toward the board. Jae-hyun thought about that. About his father's handwriting, which he knew as well as his own, and about a letter he hadn't found yet, but that he could already feel the existence of somewhere in the weight of all this. The careful architecture of a man who had spent years building toward a specific moment. Someone has been hunting Amara for 18 years, he said. Whatever the man with the ring wants from that notebook, he believed strongly enough in it to send 4 men to shoot a 25-year-old woman who works at a diner. That's not a calculated play, that's fear. Min-kyu was quiet. Whoever is orchestrating this from the other side, the photograph, the pendant on the door, the woman with the red umbrella, they were trying to reach Amara before those men did. They're racing each other to her. He looked at the window, which means there's something she carries or something she knows that one side wants destroyed and the other side wants remembered. And you're going to put yourself between them. I'm already between them. The moment I didn't hand her over to the man at the gate, I chose a side. He picked up his coffee. So we're going to do this intelligently. You're going to send 2 teams to North Halsted perimeter, exits every approach covered. We're going to do it at dawn, in daylight, not because we're not expecting a problem, but because daylight makes problems harder to hide. And you're going to be there with me. Min-kyu absorbed this. And the woman? Jae-hyun thought about Amara's face when she'd seen the photograph. The way her hand had moved before she'd decided to move it. The particular quality of a person encountering something that their body recognized before their mind caught up. She decides, he said. I'm not choosing her direction for her. Min-kyu looked at him for a moment. Something passed across his face that wasn't quite an expression, just the ghost of one. Your father would have chosen for her, he said. Not a judgment. Just an observation. I know, Jae-hyun said. At 10 in the morning, Min-kyu's team delivered a sealed package to the estate that had apparently been left with a law firm's courier service 11 years ago, with instructions to hold it until a specific date. The date had been 11 days ago. It had taken the firm's records department 11 days to locate the estate's current address and send it. The name on the package was Jae-hyun's. The handwriting was his father's. He opened it in his study with the door closed. Inside was a single letter, 3 pages, handwritten. He read it twice. Then he sat very still for a long time with the letter in his hands. When he came out of the study, his face had the quality of something that had been through significant temperature change. Not broken, but reorganized. Min-kyu took one look at him. What does it say? Jae-hyun handed him the last page, not all 3. Just this one, the part he needed Min-kyu to understand. Min-kyu read it. His expression went through 3 distinct phases before it settled. He knew, Min-kyu said. He knew everything, Jae-hyun said. He knew what they were doing to those children 18 years ago. He knew who was running it. He knew that shutting it down overtly would drive it underground, and they'd never recover the people who had already been disappeared into it. His voice was level, but the levelness was costing him something. So he didn't shut it down. He infiltrated it. He pulled 2 girls out of it himself and hid them, and spent 7 years building enough evidence to destroy it from the inside. Min-kyu was looking at the page in his hand, and he never finished. He died. Jae-hyun looked at the window. He built the evidence, and he hid it, and he wrote down how to find it, and he died before he could deliver it to anyone who could use it. And the letter, he stopped. The letter says the evidence is in the pendant. Min-kyu went very still. Not in it, Jae-hyun said. Across it, it's a compass. Half a compass. The crest is split, 1/2 on Amara's pendant, 1/2 on a pendant held by someone else. He looked at the door. At the hallway that led to the guest suite seat, the message he encoded in it can only be read when both halves are joined. Who has the other half? Jae-hyun thought about the photograph. The team's pre-dawn observation. The person standing in the rain outside North Halsted Station with a red umbrella. The other girl, he said. The one he pulled out with Amara. He hid them separately. They've been living separate lives for 18 years. He paused. She's at North Halsted. She's been waiting. Min-kyu looked at the page in his hand, then at Jae-hyun. If your father built all of this, the evidence, the pendants, the coordinates, he built it to be triggered. Something specific was supposed to start the sequence. Amara finding the notebook. Min-kyu went quiet. He knew the notebook existed, Jae-hyun said. He knew where it would end up eventually. He knew that if Amara ever found it, the men from the old network would come for her, and she'd run toward any help she could find. He stopped. Toward you, Min-kyu said. Toward the pendant on her door, Jae-hyun said, which led her to me, which led to the photograph, which leads to North Halsted. He looked at the letter in his hand. He designed the whole sequence. 18 years ago. He built a road and put Amara at one end of it and left me the map. The room was very quiet. He trusted you to be the right person. When the moment came, Min-kyu said carefully. Jae-hyun set the letter down on his desk. I don't know if he was right about that, he said. Then his phone buzzed. The team at the perimeter of North Halsted Station was reporting unexpected movement. 3 vehicles had arrived in the last 20 minutes. They were not law enforcement. They were not media. They were stationing themselves at the approach roads to the station in a pattern that the team leaders described, with the flatness of someone reading from a checklist as a coverage formation. The man with the sapphire ring had found North Halsted Station. He was there before them. And somewhere inside that building, an 18-year-old secret was waiting under a frozen clock with a red umbrella and half a compass that could destroy everything or save it, depending entirely on who arrived first. Jae-hyun made 3 calls in 4 minutes. The first was to his team leader at North Halsted, whose name was Park, and who had been doing this kind of work long enough that his voice on the phone sounded the same, whether he was reporting a traffic delay or an imminent armed engagement. Park said 3 vehicles, 6 to 8 individuals visible, 2 more likely in the cars. Said they were professional, not moving fast, not making noise, just positioning. Setting up a perimeter of their own around the station's exterior. Said nobody had gone inside yet. The second call was to a number Jae-hyun rarely used, a man inside the city's law enforcement infrastructure who was useful precisely because his usefulness was expensive enough to be exclusive. He told the man there was a situation developing at North Halsted Station and that if anything loud 6 hours, in the next 6 hours the narrative needed to be managed before it became a headline. The man said he understood and named a figure, and Jae-hyun said yes without negotiating, because there wasn't time. The third call he made, while he was already walking toward the guest suite. Min-kyu picked up on the first ring. I heard. I'm already redirecting the second team. How long? 20 minutes to the location. 15 if they push it. Push it. He stopped outside Amara's door, and Min-kyu, the man with the ring. What do we know about how he found the station? A pause. Working assumption is the notebook. If he knew the notebook contained location data and Amara had it, he'd have had people analyzing whatever she could have seen in it before they came to her apartment. The coordinates were inside, in the margin of page 11. I saw them when I looked through it this morning. Another pause shorter. He had a head start on us. He's been working this problem longer than we have. Jae-hyun looked at the closed door in front of him, at the wood grain of it, at nothing in particular. He's going to go in after her, he said. The woman inside. If he gets to her before we do, I know. The evidence my father built. The second pendant. All of it disappears. I know, Min-kyu said again. 15 minutes. Go talk to Amara, he knocked. Didn't wait for an answer before opening the door because there wasn't time for that either. And Amara was already sitting up in bed with her feet on the floor and the pendant in her hand, which told him she'd been awake and thinking for a while. She looked at his face. How bad? The man with the ring found North Halsted before us. He has people outside the station now. He came in and closed the door. Someone is inside the station. The woman from the photograph, she's been there since before dawn. We need to move. Amara stood up. The movement cost her. He saw it in the set of her jaw, the brief whitening of her knuckles on the nightstand, but she stood and she stayed standing. You're not supposed to, he started. I know what I'm not supposed to do. She reached for the jacket that someone had left on the chair. Tell me the rest while I get ready, he told her about the letter. All of it, his father's infiltration of the network, the two girls pulled out of it 18 years ago, the evidence built over 7 years and hidden before Dae-sung died. The compass split between two pendants, the sequence his father had designed, and the notebook as the trigger. Amara listened without interrupting. She listened the way she did everything, with her full attention and without visibly reacting until she'd processed what she was hearing. And then she reacted precisely and without excess. He designed this to happen, she said. Not a question. Yes, he knew I'd find that notebook. He knew it would surface eventually. He couldn't exactly when. He couldn't have known exactly. She was working buttons on the jacket with careful fingers, managing the range of motion on her left side. But he knew whoever was left from the network would come for me when I found it. He knew I'd run. He knew the pendant would bring me to you. She looked up. He used me. Jae-hyun didn't answer immediately. That was an answer of its own. He protected you, he said finally, and he used the protection as a mechanism. I'm not going to pretend those two things don't coexist. She looked at him for a long moment. The particular quality of that look not angry, not hurt, just measuring, the way you measure something you need to know, the exact weight of, made him think she'd spent a long time learning to look at difficult things without flinching away from them. We need to get to her before he does, she said. Yes. Then let's go. They went in 2 cars with Min Kyu in the lead vehicle running point. Amara rode in the second car with Jae-hyun and a man named Cho, who sat in the front passenger seat and said nothing the entire drive. The city was doing its mid-morning thing outside the windows, delivery trucks. People walking fast with coffee cups. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday and the disconnect between that and what was happening inside the car was the kind of thing you noticed, and then deliberately stopped noticing because noticing it too much was not useful. Amara held the pendant in both hands. She wasn't looking at it. She was looking out the window. What do you remember about being 6? Jae-hyun asked. Not to push. Just to give her something to do with her mind, other than sit with the fear she was managing. Fragments. She turned the pendant over. The feeling I described before the station, the cold. 2 of us. She paused, someone's hand. Not a child's hand. An adult's, older, holding mine while we moved through a crowd and telling me not to make noise and not to look back. My father? I don't know what your father looked like. He pulled out his phone, found a photograph not recent, one from years ago, Dae-sung in his 60s, the photograph taken at some public function Min Kyu had dug up from an archived newspaper. He turned the phone toward her. Amara looked at the photograph. For a moment, nothing happened on her face. Then something happened that she didn't fully control, a tightening around the eyes, a quality of breath that changed. Maybe, she said. I can't be sure. But maybe. Jae-hyun put the phone away. He told you not to look back, he said. Yes. Did you? She was quiet for a moment. No, she said, I didn't. Park met them a block from the station. He was a compact man in his 40s, with a permanently neutral expression and the kind of posture that said he'd been standing in uncomfortable places for a long time and had made his peace with it. He gave the situation report without preamble. The 3 vehicles were still in position, one at each of the main approach roads and one covering the service entrance on the east side, which was also the entrance the woman with the red umbrella had used before dawn. Splitting. 2 of his own additional team members had come in from the opposite side, through a utility corridor that connected to a building behind the station, and they were inside now, watching the interior from an upper level. No contact with the woman. She was still there in the main hall, under the clock. They could see her but hadn't approached. No movement from the ringman's people yet. Holding position. They're waiting for something, Park said. Or someone. They're waiting for us, Min-kyu said. They know we have Amara. They're expecting us to come to them. Jae-hyun looked at the station's exterior. The building was everything an abandoned building was: boards on the windows, rust on the ironwork, graffiti on the lower sections of the facade. But it was also substantial. Brick and iron and vaulted space, built in an era when train stations were meant to communicate something about permanence. The utility corridor, he said to Park. Can we get 4 people through it without being seen from the street? Tight, but yes. Then that's how we go in. He looked at Amara. You stay at the entrance until we've confirmed. It's no. Amara, she's been waiting since before dawn in an abandoned building, Amara said. Whoever she is, she came here because she knew I would come. If she sees your people first, without me, she runs or she shuts down or something worse happens. She needs to see me. She looked at him steadily. I'm going in first. Jae-hyun and Min-kyu exchanged a look. Behind me, Jae-hyun said. You walk behind me, and you do not get in front of me at any point until I say the space is clear. Understood? Amara considered this arrangement for approximately 1 second. Understood. The utility corridor smelled like old metal and standing water and the particular dead air quality of spaces that hadn't been breathed in for a long time. They went single file Park first, then Jae-hyun, then Amara, then 2 of Jae-hyun's men. Min-kyu stayed outside with the remaining team to watch the ringman's vehicles. The corridor opened into the station service level, a low-ceilinged space beneath the main hall. From above came the faint sound of the building, existing the creak and settle of old structure, the whisper of air through gaps in boards. They came up a stairwell into the main hall from the east side, and the hall opened around them, all at once. It was large enough to feel like the inside of something intended for a different scale of human activity. The ceiling vaulted high above them with ironwork that had gone dark with age. Light came through gaps in the boarding on the upper windows in long diagonal lines that caught the dust cut that moved when they moved. The clock on the north wall was stopped at 3:17. The face of it was intact, but the hands hadn't moved in nearly 2 decades. Beneath the clock, in the center of the hall, was Nadine Mercer. She was 25, roughly Amara's height, dark coat, and she was holding the red umbrella closed at her side because there was no rain in here, just the habit of the thing. She had seen them come in. She had not moved or run. She was watching them with the focused calm of someone who had been waiting a long time and had rehearsed this moment many times in her head and was now simply executing it. And her face. Amara stopped walking. The resemblance was not identical, it wasn't that. It was something more specific. A similarity in the underlying structure, the set of certain features, that produced in an observer the immediate sensation of looking at a version of a person, like a translation of the same original text into a slightly different language. Nadine looked at Amara, then at the pendant in Amara's hand. Then she reached into her coat and took out a pendant of her own. The same silver, the same crest or half of it, matching the half on Amara's, in the way that halves of broken things match each other, jagged at the joint, but clearly once continuous. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Jae-hyun's earpiece came alive. Min-kyu's voice, clipped and fast. East vehicle is moving. They're coming to the service entrance. Park was already at Jae-hyun's shoulder. 2 minutes, maybe less. Jae-hyun looked at Nadine. Whatever you need to say it fast. We're about to have company. Nadine looked at him, looked at Amara, made a decision about something. Sit down, she said to Amara. You're going to want to sit down for this. We don't have time, Jae-hyun started. I know we don't have time, Nadine said. Her voice was flat and level, not rude. Just efficient in the way that people are efficient when they've been carrying a thing for a long time and they know how much it weighs and they just want to put it down. Which is why I'm going to say it fast, and she's going to have to hold it while we deal with whatever's coming. Sit down, Amara. Amara sat down on a concrete block near the base of the clock support. Nadine crouched in front of her, put her pendant on the ground between them. We are not sisters, she said. I know that might have been a possibility you were building toward in your head. We're not. What we are. She stopped, gathered herself in a very specific way, the way you gather yourself when what you're about to say has been unsaid for 18 years. What we are is 2 girls who got caught in the same net. Same network, same operation. They moved children, changed their identities, cut them off from wherever they came from, and placed them with families, institutions, situations. I don't have details on. It wasn't adoption. It wasn't trafficking in the most obvious sense. It was something in between, something with money behind it, something organized. Amara's face was still. How do you know this? Because I was awake when it happened to me, Nadine said. You weren't, or you were, but you were young enough that the memory, she touched her own temple. It didn't hold the way mine did. I was a little older. 7, I remembered more. From outside came a sound not loud, just the echo of something mechanical, a door or a gate. Jae-hyun looked at Park. Park moved to the east side of the hall, hand inside his jacket. Keep going, Jae-hyun said to Nadine. North Halstead Station was a transit point, Nadine said. We were here, both of us. The same night, the same operation. I don't know where they were taking us after this. What I know is that a man came into the station with 2 sets of identical clothes and 2 red umbrellas, and he switched us into them and moved us out of the part of the station the operators were using. She looked at Jae-hyun. Your father. Jae-hyun said nothing. He had someone watching the network. He'd been watching it for, I don't know how long. Long enough to know when they'd be moving us. Long enough to have the clothes ready. He pulled us both out, and he separated us, and he put us with people he trusted. She picked up her pendant. He gave us these. He told me I was old enough to remember the words. He said, the pendants are a compass, and when the time comes, follow it. Amara was looking at Nadine's pendant, at the jagged edge where it would meet her own. Why did he erase her? Jae-hyun said. If he was protecting her, why did she have no documented existence before 13? Nadine looked up at him. Because the original records the real ones. Whoever she was before, those records would have told the network's operators where to look. If she existed under her birth identity, they could find her. He didn't erase her to hide her from herself. He erased the trail so they could never find her again. She paused. He did the same for me. My birth identity is gone too. I spent a lot of years being angry about that. Are you still? Amara said. Nadine considered that honestly. Some days. Less than I used to be. She looked at Amara's face. He wrote something in these pendants. Encoded in the crest when the 2 halves join. I don't know exactly what it says. I've never been able to read it alone. I've needed yours for 18 years. A sharp sound from the east side of the hall. Park's voice, low and fast. They're in the building. Service level. 1 minute, Jae-hyun moved immediately. Park hold the stairwell. By 60 seconds. He turned to Amara. Join them now. Amara looked at Nadine. Nadine held out her pendant. Amara raised hers. They brought the 2 halves together. The join was exact, not approximate, not close, but precise. The kind of fit that could only exist if both pieces had been cut from a single original object. The crest completed itself across the joint, the lines running continuously from one half to the other, and text appeared. Not hidden in the traditional sense the letters had been there, all along on both halves, but individually they were incomplete, just lines and curves that looked like decorative marks. Together they resolved into a message, small and dense, along the inside curve of the crest. Nadine read it first. Her expression changed. Amara read it. Her expression didn't change, it went very still, which was different. Jae-hyun leaned in, read it. The evidence is in the station. Maintenance room. East corridor, behind the clock housing. It has always been here. It has been waiting for both of you. From the stairwell came the sound of Park's voice raised in sharp command, and then another voice that didn't belong to any of his people, and then the specific dense sound of physical conflict. Go, Jae-hyun said. He moved toward the stairwell. A sound like green wood splitting. Amara and Nadine looked a second, 2 women who had just met and were already in the middle of the thing they'd been circling toward for 18 years, and then Nadine was on her feet and moving toward the east corridor. I know where the maintenance room is, she said. I've been here since 4 this morning. They moved fast. Amara's side was burning, and she was aware of it distantly, the way you're aware of a sound in another room, real but not the main thing. Nadine led them through a door at the east edge of the hall, into a corridor that was darker than themselves, narrower, the boards on the windows here, blocking more of the light. Behind them in the main hall, 2 more sharp sounds, the kind that didn't need to be identified. Nadine stopped at a door, old steel, rust at the hinges. The handle turned. Inside was the maintenance room machinery that hadn't operated in 2 decades, tools on a wall rack with dust on them like gray felt, and at the back, set into the wall behind a housing panel for the clock mechanism, a metal box that had been bolted into the masonry so it looked like part of the mechanism itself. You would not find it unless you knew it was there. Nadine knew it was there. She went directly to it. It has a combination, she said. His letter, your letter, the one delivered to you. Did it have a number? Jae-hyun went still. Then he pulled out his phone, found the photograph he'd taken of the last page of the letter, enlarged it. At the bottom of the page, below the main text, was a line of figures he'd read as a document reference. He read them to her. Nadine turned the dial. Stopped. Turned again. The box opened. Inside, a hard drive sealed in plastic. A stack of documents in a waterproof envelope, a USB drive, and a handwritten list of names, 2 pages, that Nadine held up and both of them looked at. Amara recognized 3 of the names immediately from the notebook she'd found outside the warehouse. Nadine was already looking at the top of the list. Her face did something complicated. The man with the ring, she said. He's on here, he's not at the top. Who's at the top? Amara said. Nadine handed her the list. Amara read the name. Read it again. She looked up at Nadine. Something cold moved through her that was not shock. It was beyond shock, in the territory past shock, where things become simply, bluntly, unbearably real. I know him, she said. I know, Nadine said. So do I. Outside in the corridor, footsteps, fast more than one person, coming from the direction of the main hall. Jae-hyun put himself between the door and the 2 women, without being asked to. His hand was at his side. The door opened. Min-kyu came through first, which was a relief, but the expression on Min-kyu's face was not a relief at all. Behind him was Park, moving slightly wrong, supporting himself on the doorframe in a way that said he'd taken something in the main hall. And behind Park was a third person. Young man, late 20s, dark jacket. One of Jae-hyun's own men, a member of the team that had been with them for 3 years. His name was Han. He'd been with Jae-hyun since before North Halstead, had ridden in the follow vehicle on the way here, had been positioned at the utility corridor entrance. He was pointing a weapon at Park's back. Min-kyu's hands were visible. His face had the controlled blankness of someone doing very rapid calculation. I need the box, Han said. His voice was steady. Not excited, not panicked. The voice of someone executing a plan. Set it on the floor and step away from it. Jae-hyun looked at Han. He'd looked at this man 300 times and never seen this face on him, or he had seen it and had read it as something else, loyalty or focus, or the particular blankness of a good operative, and he had been wrong the entire time. How long, Jae-hyun said. Han's eyes moved to him. Does it matter? To me it does. 2 years. Something crossed Han's face that wasn't quite shame and wasn't quite defiance. From the beginning. Before you brought me in. Min-kyu's jaw tightened, just barely. Just enough for Jae-hyun to read it. They placed you, Jae-hyun said. They recruited me, Han said. There's a difference. He looked at the box in Nadine's hands. The box on the floor, and I walk out of here with it. That's the only version of this. Where what? Amara said. Her voice came from behind Jae-hyun. He hadn't moved to stop her, because he didn't have time to stop her, and because he'd already understood that stopping Amara from walking into things she'd decided to walk into was not something he was capable of. She came around his left side and looked at Han directly. Her side was bleeding again. A dark stain spreading at the edge of the dressing. The wound opened by the movement through the corridor, and she didn't look at it. Where what? She said again. You walk out, and then what happens? He gets the evidence and burns it? Your people Sabacker into wherever they've been for 18 years? And the next time somebody accidentally finds a notebook. Her voice was completely level. Another woman gets 4 men sent to her apartment and shot on her own fire escape. Han looked at her. He was 28 years old, and something moved behind his face that was too complicated to read in the time they had. Set the box down, he said. No, Amara said. She stepped forward. Jae-hyun moved at the same instant, not toward Han but to the side, drawing Han's eyes, the instinctive redirection of attention that trained people make toward trained people, and Min-kyu moved in the same moment. The coordination of men who had worked together long enough that the planning happened in the muscles rather than the mind. And Park came off the doorframe, and Han's weapon moved away from Park toward Jae-hyun. Amara's elbow connected with Han's wrist from below with everything she had. The weapon hit the floor. Han's hand came up, but Min-kyu was already there. And then Park, And 30 seconds later, Han was on the floor of the maintenance room, with his hands pinned and Park's knee in his back, breathing hard, staring at the ceiling of a room he hadn't expected to end up in. Amara stood with her hand pressed against her side, breathing. The box was still in Nadine's hands. The name at the top of that list, Jae-hyun said. He was looking at Han. That's who you work for. Han said nothing. I know you're not going to tell me, Jae-hyun said. That's fine. I already know the name. He looked at Amara. She knows the name. Han's eyes moved to Amara, and for the first time since he'd come through the door, something in his expression fractured, just slightly, just at the edges, but enough. You should have stayed in the diner, he said, not unkindly, almost like a person talking to themselves. Amara looked at him. Yeah, she said. I know. Outside in the main hall, the building had gone quiet again. Whatever had happened when Park came through, it was done. Somewhere above them, the clock face looked out over an empty space frozen at 3:17, and the light through the cracked boards moved with the slow persistence of light that has all day and is not in any hurry. Jae-hyun looked at the box, at the list in Amara's hand, at the name at the top of it, a name that would change everything when it became public, a name connected to enough legitimate infrastructure in this city that the change would be seismic and slow and deeply uncomfortable for a very large number of people who preferred things as they were. He looked at Amara. I need you to understand what happens when we walk out of this building with that box, he said. My father spent 7 years building this. The people who've been protecting the network for 18 years are going to understand that the game changed the moment we step outside. The man with the ring is a soldier. The name at the top of that list. He paused. That man has resources we haven't seen yet. Amara looked at him, then at the box, then at Nadine, who was watching both of them with the patience of someone who has already had this conversation with herself and arrived at her answer. Your father wrote, protect the girl until she remembers who she was, Amara said. I remember now. Not everything, but enough. She looked at the box. Enough to know that walking out with this is the only thing that makes any of the last 18 years mean something other than damage. The building shifted around them, old iron, old brick, the groan of a structure that had held on for 20 years past when anyone expected it to. Jae-hyun reached out and took the box from Nadine, put it under his arm. Then we walk out, he said. But when Park pulled Han to his feet to move him toward the corridor, Han's hand came up fast, not toward his lost weapon, toward his jacket pocket, and what came out was not a weapon but a phone. And his thumb moved on it before anyone could stop it. And 1 second later, a sound came from somewhere below them in the building. Deep and structural, the specific sound of a charge that has been set and triggered, and the floor shifted under their feet. Han looked at Jae-hyun. His face was completely without expression, now past expression. In the place people go when they have used up all their available feeling. He told me if I was compromised to burn it, Han said. The evidence, the building, everything in it. He looked at the box. You have 10 minutes before the east support goes, and the floor above the maintenance level comes down. The dust was already moving in the light. 10 minutes. Jae-hyun didn't waste 3 seconds of it. He looked at Park. Get Han out. Service corridor the way we came in. Don't let him touch anything on the way. Park already had Han's arm. Han wasn't resisting. He had the specific stillness of a man who had made his last available move and was now simply watching what happened next. Min-kyu. Jae-hyun's voice was completely flat. The ringman's people outside, they're going to hear whatever just went off below us. They'll move. Already moving, Min-kyu said. His phone was in his hand. I can hear it from here. Call the second team. Tell them to hold the east approach regardless of what they have to do to hold it. Nobody comes into this building behind us. He looked at Amara. Can you run? Amara had her hand pressed hard against her side. The stain had spread to the width of her palm. She looked at him with an expression that said the question was beside the point. Go, she said. They went. The corridor back toward the main hall was darker than it had been. 10 minutes ago, the charge below had shifted something structural, and 2 of the boards on the upper windows had come loose and fallen inward, blocking the diagonal light that had been coming through. Dust was still moving in the air, the heavy disturbed dust of old buildings, suddenly asked to do things they hadn't done in years. Under their feet, the floor had a different quality than before. Not unstable yet. but changed like a table that has had one leg shortened functional until it isn't. Nadine was ahead of them. She knew the building. She'd been in it since 4 in the morning, and she'd used the time the way careful people use time systematically, learning the space, mapping the exits. Because Nadine Mercer had apparently spent 18 years developing the habits of someone who always needed to know where the door was. She moved through the main hall toward the north side, without hesitation, toward a secondary exit Jae-hyun's team hadn't used on the way in. Min-kyu was on his phone, in a continuous low-voiced stream of instruction. Jae-hyun carried the box under his left arm and moved close behind Amara, close enough to catch her if the wound took her legs, which it might. He could hear her breathing controlled, deliberate, the breathing of someone treating pain as a management problem rather than an experience. They were halfway across the main hall when the second charge went. It was below them and to the east, and it was larger than the first. And what it did to the floor was not subtle. The entire east quadrant of the hall dropped approximately 4 inches in a single lurching movement that sent Nadine into the wall, and Amara's knee onto the floor, and 300 pounds of ironwork from the upper gallery railing onto the space. 6 feet behind Jae-hyun, with a sound like a building clearing its throat. Jae-hyun had Amara up before she'd finished going down. His hand at her arm, her weight against him for 2 seconds, and then she was back on her feet and moving, and he was moving with her. He said 10 minutes, Min-kyu said. He was running beside them. He was lying, Jae-hyun said. Or they moved the timer up when they heard us coming. Keep going. Nadine had the north exit door open. It was heavy steel, the kind of door that had been sealed for years and didn't want to move, and she had both hands on it and was pulling with everything she had, and it was moving but slowly, grinding on a frame that the floor shift had torqued out of square. Jae-hyun got to it, put the box down, got both hands on the door beside Nadine's and pulled. The door opened. Cold air came through, and it was the best thing any of them had felt in the last 10 minutes. Gray Chicago daylight and alley, a chain-link fence 20 feet away. Nadine went through. Amara went through. Min-kyu went through. Jae-hyun picked up the box and went through. Behind them, somewhere below the east side of the building, something gave way with a sound that was not an explosion so much as a surrender, a long, grinding collapse of material that had been told to hold, and finally couldn't. The north exit door, still open, framed a view back into the main hall, and what the view showed was the clock wall and the clock face, and then a roiling cloud of interior dust consuming both of them as the east floor came down. The 4 of them were in the alley. They were in the alley, and Jae-hyun had the box, and nobody was dead. He gave himself 2 seconds to acknowledge this, and then he heard the sound from the far end of the alley, and the 2 seconds were over. 3 of the ringman's people had come around the north side of the building. A sound like green wood splitting. They'd heard the charges and moved to cover additional exits, and they had come around the corner of the alley at the exact moment that the 4 of them had come out of the door. And now everyone was looking at everyone else in the particular arrested way of a situation that has not yet decided what it is. Jae-hyun assessed the 3 men in less than 2 seconds. Professional spacing. The man on the left had his hand inside his jacket, and the other 2 were positioning, one moving slightly right to widen the angle. Not amateurs. Controlled. Min-kyu stepped forward, and to the left, mirroring the man on the right, doing the thing trained people do when they're drawing a geometry that works in their favor. The box, the man in the center said, he was the one with his hand in his jacket. Not the ring man, younger 40s, the specific face of a man who has been given and is committed to executing it. Put it down and walk away. No, Jae-hyun said, I'm not negotiating. Neither am I. He looked at the man steadily. You have a problem. You were sent here to get something, and right now the building that thing was in is collapsing. Your employer triggered charges inside a structure in Chicago in broad daylight. That's not something you walk away from cleanly. Police are going to be here, and he glanced at Min-kyu. How long? Dispatch got a call 4 minutes ago, Min-kyu said. Someone in the neighborhood heard the first charge. 4 minutes ago, Jae-hyun said. Which means 6 minutes from now, or less. This alley is going to be full of law enforcement responding to a building collapse with fire damage in Lincoln Park. And everyone in it is going to need a very specific explanation for why they're here. He looked at the man. I have one ready. Do you? The man in the center didn't move. But the calculation happening behind his eyes was visible, and calculation was better than commitment, because committed men didn't calculate. The man on the left moved first. Not toward Jae-hyun, toward Amara, and that was a different play. A read on the situation that said the box was secondary and Amara was primary, because she was the one who could identify the name at the top of the list, even if the box burned, and so she had to mind. Jae-hyun moved at the same time Min-kyu moved, and the alley became briefly, violently close. Not drawn out, not cinematic. The specific brutal brevity of trained people in a small space leverage and angle, and the willingness to commit to a direction and stay committed when it hurts, which it did, because the man Jae-hyun was dealing with was good and got an elbow across Jae-hyun's jaw. Before Jae-hyun got the position he needed, and the taste of blood was immediate and metallic and beside the point. He heard Amara behind him. He heard her specifically, the sound of her movement, and he didn't look because he couldn't look, but he heard it, and it was not the sound of someone going down. 20 seconds, maybe 25. Then the alley was quieter. The three men were not gone. Two of them were on the ground, and one was against the fence with Min-kyu's hand at his collar and the fence wire pressing into his back, but they were no longer the immediate problem. Jae-hyun straightened, worked his jaw, still attached. Good. He looked back at Amara. She was standing. Nadine was beside her. Amara had her hand pressed against her side again, and there was new blood on her sleeve that hadn't been there before, but she was standing, and her eyes were clear. "You hit someone," he said. "He came at me," she said. "With your wound, I know about my wound." She looked at the man against the fence. "Ask him where his employer is. We don't have much time." Jae-hyun looked at the man against the fence. The man looked back with the expression of someone who has been briefed extensively on not talking. "The sapphire ring," Jae-hyun said. "Where is he?" The man said nothing. "He's not in those vehicles," Min-kyu said. "My team would have flagged him. He's close, but he's not in the vehicles." Jae-hyun thought about that. About the way the ringman operated, not moving until the situation was resolved, letting his people work until the outcome was clear, and then stepping in for the clean part. He had the habit of proximity without exposure, the organizational signature of someone who had been doing this for a long time and had learned to stay one step removed from the physical mess. "He's watching," Jae-hyun said. "He set the charges remotely or had Han do it, and now he's watching to see if it worked, and when it doesn't, he looked at the alley exit. He'll move." From somewhere in the city's middle distance came the sound of sirens. Not close yet, but coming. The directional pull of sound bending around buildings toward them. "We need to split," Min-kyu said. "You and Amara to take the box north. Nadine comes with me east. We do not go back to the estate, they have the address. I have a secondary location in Evanston." "The man at the fence," Jae-hyun said. Min-kyu's expression said he had a plan for that too, and it did not require discussion. Jae-hyun looked at Amara. "Can you make it to the car?" She looked at him with something that was not quite exasperation and not quite humor, and existed in the specific space between those two things that people arrive at when they are exhausted and in pain and still functional. "Stop asking me that," she said. They moved. The car Min-kyu had staged on the north side was a gray sedan, unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that disappeared into Chicago traffic because as it was designed to. Jae-hyun got Amara into the back, got in beside her, put the box on the floor between his feet. The driver was a man named Song, who had been working with Min-kyu for 7 years, and who pulled out of the parking space with the calm of someone going to a routine appointment. Amara was pressing both hands against her side now, leaning back against the seat, with her head tipped slightly of someone up in the specific posture of someone managing significant pain through positioning. Her face was the color of old paper. "How bad?" Jae-hyun said. "I'll make it to Evanston." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "The wound opened when I hit the floor back there. It's not it didn't rupture anything that wasn't already compromised. I need Dr. Yoon and about 8 hours of not moving." "You'll get them." "After," she said. "After what?" "After we figure out where the man with the ring went." She looked at the window. The city was moving past outside, unaware, the total indifference of a large city to the specific dramas happening inside it. He triggered those charges. He tried to burn the building with us in it. The evidence is in this box and he knows it didn't burn, which means he knows we have it. She turned back to Jae-hyun. He's going to come at us again. Not the soldiers, him. Directly. Because he's out of soldiers and he's out of time, and the name at the top of that list is about to be on a hard drive in federal hands. Jae-hyun looked at the box. We need to get the hard drive to someone I trust. Who do you trust? He thought about that, honestly. In his business, trust was a compound question. Who do you trust to want what's right? Who do you trust to have the capability to act on it? And those two populations rarely overlap fully. There's a federal attorney, he said. She's been looking at the network's financial structures for 2 years without knowing what she was looking at. She's been building a case on the money side without the evidence to connect it to the operational history. What's in this box gives her the operational history. You know a federal attorney. I know many people I probably shouldn't know, he said. It's been useful more than once. Something moved across Amara's face that wasn't quite a smile, but occupied the same general space. Your father's son, she said, not unkindly. Jae-hyun looked out the window. That's a complicated thing to say, I know. She looked at her hands. At the pendant still around her neck. He built something good in the wrong wrapping. I'm still deciding what to do with that. So am I, he said. Song's voice came from the front vehicle behind us. Third car back. It picked us up when we turned on Halsted. Jae-hyun looked in the mirror. Gray SUV, 2 car lengths back, maintaining distance with the specific patience of a tail that knows it's been spotted and has decided it doesn't matter. How many in it? He said. Can't tell. Windows are tinted. He looked at Amara. She had already seen the mirror. She was already sitting up straighter, the pain reassigning itself to background. He found us fast, she said. He had people on the north side. They saw us leave. Where do we go? Jae-hyun thought. The Evanston location was compromised now. If the tail stayed with them, they'd deliver Min-kyu's secondary location to the ringman, and that was worse than useless. The federal attorney's office was downtown. 40 minutes in this traffic, and a tailed vehicle pulling into a federal building was a different kind of problem. Song, he said, River North. Take us to the restaurant on Erie. Song didn't ask which restaurant. He'd been driving for Jae-hyun long enough to know there was only one restaurant on Erie that mattered, a Korean place that had been in the same family for 30 years, and whose back room had 2 exits, one of which was a loading dock that connected to a service alley running behind 4 city blocks. The gray SUV stayed 3 cars back. It was patient the way the ringman was patient. Not aggressive, just present, waiting for the moment when patience paid off. Jae-hyun called Min-kyu. We have a tail, he said. North side pickup. So I see it on traffic. Min-kyu had eyes on the city's camera infrastructure, something they'd quietly invested in years ago for exactly these situations. 1 vehicle, 2 occupants visible through the front window, but the tint on the back. Is he in it? A pause. The driver matches description of someone from the ringman's outer circle. I can't confirm the back seat. Jae-hyun looked at the box between his feet, at Amara. If he's in the vehicle, Amara said, reading his face, and we go to ground somewhere. He follows us in. Yes, so we don't go to ground. She looked at the window, at the city. We make him come to us on terms we choose. Jae-hyun looked at her. You're suggesting we stop running. I'm suggesting that a man who just blew charges in a building to destroy evidence of his own crimes is not thinking about outcomes anymore. He's thinking about survival. She turned to face him fully, which cost her something in the side, but she paid it. That's the moment you stop running from someone. When they're more afraid than you are. Jae-hyun held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at the mirror again. The gray SUV was still there. Song, he said. Pull over. Song looked in the mirror. Here? Here. Song pulled the car to the curb on a commercial block dry cleaner, nail salon, insurance office, and put it in park. They waited. The gray SUV did not pull over. It drove past them slowly, and Jae-hyun got a clear look through the front window at the driver. And the passenger seat was empty, and the windows on the back were too dark to see through. Then it was past them and pulling to its own stop 20 yards ahead. Nobody got out. Amara was watching it. He wants to see what you do, she said. He's still managing. So am I, Jae-hyun said. He picked up the box, turned it over in his hands. The sealed hard drive inside, the documents, the USB. 18 years of his father's careful invisible work, compressed into something he could carry under one arm. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He looked at it, looked at the SUV, answered. The voice was the one from the gate the night before. Older, unhurried, with the cadence of a man accustomed to being heard without raising his volume. You have something I need. the ring man said. You tried to burn us inside a building, Jae-hyun said. That's not a negotiating posture, I usually respond to. That was a contingency I didn't control. I want you to understand that. Han worked for you for 2 years. Han made decisions I didn't authorize in the moment. The charges were his decision. A pause, yes. And you need me to believe that. I need you to understand that what's in that box, the specific contents of it, will do considerably more damage than you're anticipating. Not to me, to this city. To people who have nothing to do with any of this. Jae-hyun said nothing. Your father understood that, the ring man said. That's why he spent 7 years building it quietly, instead of exposing it immediately. He understood that exposure has collateral. The financial connections in those documents reach into infrastructure this city depends on. Schools, transit, healthcare contracts. You pull that thread without managing the unravel, and you damage things that you're trying to scare me with the consequences of exposing you, Jae-hyun said. That's a different argument than the ones your people made in the alley. My people in the alley were operating on old instructions. I'm giving you new ones. Another pause. Meet with me. Just us. 1 hour. I'll come to you wherever you choose. We can discuss a version of this that doesn't require burning everything down. Amara was watching Jae-hyun's face. She could hear the voice through the phone, not the words, but the tone of it, the particular frequency of a man making an argument he has prepared. She reached out and touched Jae-hyun's arm. When he looked at her, she shook her head once. Small, definite. He watched her face. She was right, and he knew she was right. This was the play. This was what you did when you'd run out of operational leverage. You offered the meeting, you offered the reasonable version, and you used the meeting to create conditions your people had already pre-positioned for. No meeting, he said. A silence on the phone. You understand what you're choosing, the ring man said. I understand what you built and what it did to 2 6-year-old girls, Jae-hyun said. I understand that my father spent 7 years of his life trying to end it and died before he could. And I understand that you just tried to kill the 2 women who survived it. Inside a building, you paid someone to wire. He looked at the SUV ahead of them on the curb. So no meeting. He ended the call. The SUV's reverse lights came on. Song's hands moved to the wheel before Jae-hyun said anything. He's not going back, Amara said. He's repositioning. I know. Jae-hyun looked at her side, the pale set of her face, at the pendant at her neck and the way she was holding herself upright through something that would have put most people horizontal an hour ago. I need you to do something for me. She looked at him. The federal attorney, he said. Her name is Sandra Osei. I'm going to send you her direct number. I need you to call her and tell her not everything, just enough. Tell her there's evidence connected to a child trafficking network operating in Chicago years and that someone is attempting to destroy it right now, and that she needs to begin a protective filing process for information she's about to receive. Amara looked at him. What are you going to be doing? I'm going to make sure you have time to make that call. She was quiet for a moment. That's not a plan. That's a sentence, with the important part left out. The SUV is going to move in about 30 seconds, and when it does, Song is going to go right, and I'm going to get out of this car. You're going to get out of it. He wants the box. While he's focused on the box, you call Osei. Min-kyu's team is 2 minutes out. 2 minutes is all I need you to buy. Amara stared at him. The specific look of someone processing something they profoundly object to, but cannot immediately disprove the logic of. That box in your hands is the only thing that matters, she said. Not you standing in the street, Nye. The box in your hands and 30 seconds of his attention. Somewhere else is what finishes this, he said. Call Osei. He gave her the number from his phone. She took it. She looked at it. She looked at him. 2 minutes, she said. It was not a question, and it was not quite a statement. It was a thing she was handing him, a specific allotment of 2 minutes, and the weight of it was not small. 2 minutes, he said. The SUV's reverse lights went off. The vehicle started to move, not reversing, pulling forward, repositioning to close the gap between them. Song said now. Jae-hyun opened his door. The air outside was cold and smelled like rain coming, and the street was doing its ordinary Chicago Tuesday thing around him as he stepped out with the box under his arm and stood on the sidewalk in full view of the gray SUV 30 yards ahead and waited for the man in the back seat to make his decision. For a long 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then the SUV's back door opened and the ring man stepped out. He was exactly what he'd been at the gate the night before, white-haired, composed, the sapphire throwing its small blue flash in the gray daylight. He looked at Jae-hyun across the 30 yards of Chicago sidewalk with the expression of a man reassessing a situation he thought he understood. He looked at the box. He looked at Jae-hyun's face. He said something to the driver Jae-hyun couldn't hear, and then he started walking. Inside the car, Amara put the phone to her ear. It rang twice. A woman's voice answered, "Ose." Amara breathed in. "My name is Amara Winslow. I have 18 years of evidence about a child trafficking network in Chicago, and someone just tried to blow up the building it was stored in. I need you to listen to me very carefully." Behind her, through the car window, Jae-hyun and the man with the sapphire ring were 10 yards apart and closing, and the cold air between them held everything that 18 years of buried truth eventually becomes when it finally runs out of places to hide. The 30 yards closed to 20, then 15, and the ring man walked like someone who had decided that the time for sending other people was over. His name was Elliot Voss. Jae-hyun had read it at the top of his father's list and recognized it the way you recognize names you've heard in periphery for years without ever attaching them to a face. Voss was in construction, in city contracts, in the kind of civic infrastructure that put his name on buildings and kept it off investigations. 70 years old, white-haired, the sapphire ring that Amara had carried in her memory like a bruise. He looked like what he was, a man who had spent a lifetime being powerful enough that he'd stopped needing to look dangerous. He stopped 6 feet from Jae-hyun, looked at the box. "You know what's in there destroys more than me," Voss said. He wasn't raising his voice, didn't need to. The financial connections go through 3 city council members, a hospital system, and a transit authority contract that funds 17 bus lines serving the South Side. You pull my thread and those things unravel with it. "You keep saying that," Jae-hyun said. "Like I haven't already thought about it. Like you've thought about it seriously. There's a difference." Voss's eyes moved to the box. "Your father understood the difference. That's why he spent 7 years building the case quietly instead of burning it all down in year 1. He was going to manage the unravel. Control the exposure so the collateral was minimal." He paused. He didn't get to finish. "You know what happened to the plans of careful men when they don't get to finish? They find someone to finish them," Jae-hyun said. "You're not your father." "No," Jae-hyun said, "I'm not." He heard a car door, not his, from Voss's direction. The driver of the SUV had gotten out and was standing by the hood with his hands visible, but his positioning clear, ready, watching Jae-hyun's right side. Jae-hyun did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Voss. "My father built the case to be used," he said. "He didn't build it to be negotiated with. If he'd wanted negotiation, he would have come to you directly, and he would have done it 20 years ago." He held the box steady. "He came to you through evidence and through law, because that's the only version of this that sticks. Every other version, you survive it. You find another Han, another vehicle, another building. The only version you don't survive is the one where what you built gets put in front of a federal judge." Voss looked at him for a long moment. The calculation behind his eyes was the same calculation it had been the whole time, not whether to act, but when and how. He had the patience of old money and long plans, and Jae-hyun knew it, and Voss knew Jae-hyun knew it, and they were both standing on a Chicago sidewalk in the daylight, with sirens still somewhere in the middle distance from North Halsted and the whole thing balanced on a point so fine that breathing wrong could tip it. Then Voss's hand moved, not toward a weapon, toward his jacket pocket, slow and visible, the deliberate non-threat of a man making sure you saw what he was reaching for. He brought out a phone, looked at it, looked at Jae-hyun. "Your woman is on the phone with Sandra Ose," he said. Jae-hyun said nothing. "You think I don't have eyes on Ose's line?" Voss said. "I've had eyes on Ose's line for 8 months. I know exactly what she's been building, and I know every conversation she's had about it." He put the phone away. "The moment your woman tells her what she has, OC files for protective custody of the evidence, and this becomes federal. You understand what federal means. It means it takes 4 years and a team of lawyers, and by the time anything resembling a consequence arrives, half the people on that list have made arrangements." Jae-hyun looked at him. "Or it means what it actually means," he said, "which is that the evidence is now in a federal record and cannot be destroyed, and the filing creates a paper trail that makes every subsequent attempt to manage the outcome itself part of the record." He paused. "You've had eyes on OC's line for 8 months. She's been building her case for 2 years. How much of what she's built have you been able to stop? Voss's jaw tightened. The first visible thing. The first crack in the composed surface. None, Jae-hyun said. Because she's careful and she's patient and she doesn't care how long it takes. He looked at Voss. My father found her for a reason. The letter he left me had her name in it. He'd been watching her for 3 years before he died, and he put her name in a letter for me to find 11 years later because he knew she'd still be there, still building, still patient. He built the case for her even though he'd never met her. He shifted the box slightly under his arm. She doesn't need me to walk this into her office. She needs Amara to finish that phone call. That's all she needs. Something changed in Voss's face. Not breaking, collapsing inward. The specific compression of a man watching a structure he built fall below its own weight. He'd spent decades being the one who understood the system better than the people in it, who could read 5 moves ahead and position himself before anyone else reached the current move. And he was looking at Jae-hyun now with the expression of a man who had finally encountered something he couldn't outposition. He had positioned himself against every variable except the one his father had spent his last 7 years quietly constructing. He had never known about the letter. Min-kyu's cars came around the corner from the north. 2 of them, the specific, unhurried pace of people who are not chasing anything, because the situation is already resolved. They pulled up, and 4 men got out, and the driver of Voss's SUV looked at them and made the calculation that his employer was going to make very shortly, and stepped away from the hood with his hands where everyone could see them. Voss looked at the cars, looked at Jae-hyun, looked at the box. You're going to hand that to her, he said. Not a question anymore. Just a man reading the final page of something. Yes, Jae-hyun said. And in 4 years, when the lawyers are done. I think you're underestimating Ose, Jae-hyun said. Voss looked at the sapphire ring on his hand. A gesture so small and private, it seemed like he'd forgotten for a moment that he was standing on a public sidewalk. He turned at once. Stopped. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and stood there. Min-kyu came to Jae-hyun's shoulder. Behind him, 2 men moved toward Voss with the quiet professionalism of people who have done this before and don't need to make it dramatic. Voss didn't resist. He looked at Jae-hyun one more time. Your father was a better man than you know, he said. I'm starting to understand that, Jae-hyun said. Then Voss was in Min-kyu's hands, and Min-kyu was on his phone to the federal line he kept for exactly these moments, and the sidewalk was full of the controlled activity of a situation moving toward its resolution. And Jae-hyun stood in the middle of it with the box and looked back at his car. Amara was still on the phone. He could see her through the window. Her posture, the set of her shoulders, the way she was speaking with the focused precision of someone delivering exactly what needs to be delivered and nothing extra. The blood on her sleeve, the pendant at her neck. Sound, the particular quality of her face that he'd been reading since she'd pressed the pendant into his hand in the rain, which was the quality of someone who had been carrying something alone for a very long time and was setting it down. She looked up and saw him through the glass. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she went back to the call. Sandra Osi was 44 years old, and she had the specific energy of a woman, and she had the specific toward a thing for so long that being handed the culminating piece of it produced in her, not excitement, but a deep, focused quiet, the quiet of a surgeon who has finally gotten the angle they needed and is now simply doing the work. She came to them. That was the first thing. She didn't ask them to come to the federal building. She came to the secondary location in Evanston that Min-kyu had organized, a clean house in a quiet block that smelled like other people's furniture and had enough rooms to spread out in. She brought one assistant, and she left her phone in her car, and she sat across from Amara and Nadine at a kitchen table at 4 in the afternoon, and she opened the box, and she went through every item in it with the careful, systematic attention of someone who has been waiting for this exact material and knows exactly where each piece fits. Amara had gotten Dr. Yoon again. He'd redressed the wound and told her in the tone of a man who has stopped expecting compliance that she needed to not move for the rest of the day, which she interpreted as needing to not move for the next 2 hours. She sat at the table with her side managed, and her hands around a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and she watched Osei work. And she answered questions when Osi asked them, and she did not look at the hard drive when Osi finally opened it because she had the feeling that looking at it directly at the specific documented reality of what had been done and what it had cost was something she needed to do alone, in her own time, not in a kitchen in Evanston, with 4 other people present. Nadine sat beside her. They had not talked much since the building. There was too much to say and not enough yet resolved for saying it to feel right. But they occupied the same space with a naturalness that neither of them commented on the ease of 2 people who had been strangers an hour ago, but who shared something that made the normal mechanics of meeting someone for the first time irrelevant. At one point, Nadine reached over and poured more hot coffee into Amara's cold cup without being asked. Amara said, "Thank you." Nadine said, "You've been holding that pendant since we sat down." Amara looked at her hand. She was, in fact, holding it, had been, without being consciously aware of it, the pendant in her right hand, with her thumb moving across the joined crest, the way you move your thumb across something you're trying to memorize. "Habit," she said. "Mine's in my pocket," Nadine said. "I keep checking that it's still there." She looked at the table. 18 years of being careful about where I put it. "Where did you grow up?" Amara said. "Milwaukee. You?" "South Shore. South side of Chicago." Nadine looked at the window. "He put you close." Amara thought about that. About Daesung, who had hidden 1 girl in Chicago and 1 in Milwaukee, close enough, maybe, that if the time came and things worked the way he'd planned, the geography wouldn't be impossible. Or maybe that was reading intention into proximity. Maybe it was just where he'd had people he trusted. "Did your family know?" Amara said. "My family, the family he placed me with, I think they knew some version of it. Not all of it. They knew I needed to be kept safe, and they knew not to push on the early childhood questions, and they loved me regardless of what they didn't know." Nadine's hands were flat on the table. It took me a long time not to be angry about that. About the not knowing being built into the arrangement. "Are you still?" Nadine considered. "I'm angry about what was done to us before he found us," she said. "The original thing, the network. I'm angry about that every single day, and I expect I will be for a while." She looked at the hard drive on the table. She stopped. "He pulled us out. He hid us. He spent the rest of his life building the evidence to end it. I can be angry about the method without being angry about the man." Amara looked at the pendant in her hand. "I'm not there yet," she said. "I know," Nadine said. "You don't have to be." Across the table, Osi looked up from the documents. She had the expression of a woman who has been solving a puzzle for 2 years and has just found the corner piece she'd been missing. "The 3 council members on this list," she said. "The financial records show disbursements going back 16 years. Is there a corresponding transfer record for the early period, pre-2010? Jae-hyun, who had been standing by the window, came to the table. Page 7 of the document stack. "There's a separate ledger for the founding period. My father kept 2 sets of records, one tracking the network's own finances, one tracking the legitimate infrastructure he identified as connected to it." Osi turned to page 7, went quiet for 30 seconds. "This is going to hold," she said. Not to anyone specifically. To the room. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Elliot Voss was arrested at 6:27 that evening. Not by Min Kyu's people, they handed him to Osi's office, which had coordinated with federal law enforcement with the speed of an agency that had been waiting for exactly this moment and had its paperwork pre-staged. The arrest happened quietly, without cameras, the way federal arrests of infrastructure-connected men often happened when the prosecutors involved were experienced enough to understand that a perp walk created news cycles, that created lawyers, that created delays. 3 of the names on the list were served with federal grand jury subpoenas before 8 o'clock. A 4th, the Transit Authority connection, had apparently anticipated something was coming. He'd been moving money for the past week, which OC said was its own form of evidence, and would be treated accordingly. Han was in federal custody. He'd been processed from Min Kyu's possession to official custody with the smooth hand-off of a situation that had been pre-coordinated, and Jae-hyun had answered questions about Han for 2 hours, with Min Kyu present and a lawyer on the phone, and when he was done answering questions, he sat in a room by himself for a while and thought about 2 years of dinners and briefings, and the particular trust you build with someone who is paid to be beside you in dangerous situations, and what it meant to have been wrong about that for the entirety of those 2 years. He was not devastated by it. He had been wrong about people before, and he had found, over time, that the specific pain of that kind of wrong, the structural, long-running, deliberate betrayal did not get smaller with experience. But you got better at carrying it without letting it change the wrong things about you. Min-kyu found him in the room, sat down across from him, said nothing for a moment. Park is fine, he said finally. 2 cracked ribs. He's annoyed about it. He should be annoyed. He's 51 years old. He shouldn't be in stairwell confrontations. He would disagree with that characterization of the age issue. I know he would. They sat. Han was placed before we brought him in, Min-kyu said. It wasn't a recruitment that happened on our watch. They put him in position, and then we picked him up. I know, I should have don't, Jae-hyun said. We had the same information, and we both read it the same way. That's not failure, it's limits. We work with the information we have. Min-kyu looked at the table. He was not a man who spent a lot of time visibly processing difficult things, process them, and then he managed their aftermath. And that was the order of operations he'd worked in for 18 years. But right now, he was doing the visible part, and Jae-hyun let him. Your father knew, Min-kyu said. That's what the letter says. He knew about the network from the inside because he was inside things. That's how he knew when they were moving those girls. He was connected to Voss, not as a partner, not willingly, but the way you get connected to things in this business without choosing every connection you accumulate. He looked up. He spent 7 years untangling himself from it by building the evidence to end it. Yes, that's a different version of him than the one I had. It's a different version than the one I had too, Jae-hyun said. I'm still working out what to do with it. Min-kyu nodded. The estate. I know. What you've built is different from what he built. That's true, regardless of the letter. I know that too. Jae-hyun looked at the wall. But knowing something and feeling the weight of it are 2 different timelines. Amara found him later. She came down the hallway of the Evanston house, moving slowly, one hand against the wall, not for support exactly, more for the reassurance of having something solid nearby. Sups. Dr. Yoon had given her something for the pain that was doing its work at the lower edge of her awareness, softening the edges without removing the information. The door to the room he was in was open. She stood in the doorframe. He looked up. OC left, Amara said. She has enough for an immediate filing. She said she stopped. She said your father's work was the most complete evidence architecture she'd seen in 20 years of federal prosecution. Those were her words. Jae-hyun was quiet. That means something, Amara said. I know what it means. She came into the room, lowered herself into the chair across from him with the careful deliberation of someone managing a body that is voicing strong objections. She put both hands on the table. The pendant was still around her neck. For a moment, neither of them spoke. What was his name? Jae-hyun said. Your original name, do you know? Amara looked at the table. OC found a partial record in the network's own files. A name used in the early operational phase, before they changed identities. She stopped. It doesn't feel like mine. I've been Amara Winslow since I was 13. Whatever name I had before, that belongs to a 6-year-old I don't remember being. You don't want to know it? She thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. I think I want to know it the way you want to know the history of a house you grew up in. Knowing doesn't change the living, but it fills something in. She looked at the pendant. He was right about that part. Remember who you choose to be. Not who you were assigned to be. Not who they made you be. Who you choose. Jae-hyun looked at her. And who are you choosing? She met his eyes. Amara Winslow, she said. Same as before. Just she considered. Just now it's mine, the whole way down. Not borrowed. Not constructed. Mine because I chose it with full information, instead of because someone else built it for me. He nodded. That distinction matters to you, he said. It's the whole thing, she said. The whole thing is that distinction. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. The quality of it was not the focused, rapid calculation he'd been doing since she appeared in his headlights that had given way to something slower, more like the way you look at something you've been trying to understand and have not completely, but enough, begun to understand. What are you going to do with your organization? She said. He didn't look away. Dismantle the parts that need dismantling. That's a lot of parts. Yes. How long does that take? Longer than I'd like, he said. Shorter than it would have taken my father. She accepted that. And the parts that don't need dismantling? He thought about the Kwon Foundation. About legitimate assets and the infrastructure of reputation that could be redirected toward things that warranted it. I have a building, he said, in the warehouse district, adjacent to North Halstead. My father's foundation holds the deed. It's been sitting in a trust for 11 years, generating dust and property tax. Amara waited. The station is going to need to be assessed, he said, for structural damage, for what can be salvaged. I'm told the main hall is largely intact, despite the east floor going. The clock. I don't know about the clock. She was looking at him with the expression of a person who is listening to someone talk around the thing they actually mean. What do you want to do with it, she said. He looked at the table. Something that isn't what it's been, he said, which is a building where something happened to 2 children and then sat empty for 18 years with nobody accountable for either fact. He looked up. Something that uses the space for what it should have always been used for. Community. People who need somewhere to go, he paused. Specifically people who need somewhere to go when they're young, and the systems that are supposed to hold them haven't. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Your father's money, she said. His and mine, he said, both, if that's what it takes. She was quiet. Outside, evening was coming down over Evanston, the particular blue-gray quality of early autumn dusk in the Midwest, the kind of light that makes everything look briefly like it has always been and will always be exactly as it is. That doesn't fix what happened, she said. No, he said. It doesn't. It doesn't make you absolved of what your family was part of. I know that, but it's not nothing. No, he said. It's not nothing. She put her hand flat on the table. The pendant swung slightly forward on its chain as she leaned, and the 2 halves of the joined crest caught the room's light for a moment before it settled. Then do it, she said. Do it because it matters, not because it makes the math work out. He looked at her hand on the table, then at her face. I intend to, he said. Nadine left for Milwaukee at 9 that night. Jae-hyun's people drove her, not because she couldn't make the trip herself, which she clearly could, but because the specific moment they were in suggested that arriving home alone at midnight after the day they'd had was a thing that didn't need to be done alone if it didn't have to be. She and Amara said goodbye in the front hallway of the Evanston house. They stood 3 feet apart, and there was the brief awkwardness of people who have been through something enormous together and have not yet developed the vocabulary for what they are to each other. I'll find you, Nadine said, when the noise settles. I'll be at the diner, Amara said. Nadine looked at her. Still? Amara thought about it for a while. Until I figure out the next thing, she paused. I know every customer's order. Harold gets decaf with 2 sugars. Nadine's expression did something that was not quite a smile and was more than one. You can't save everyone by remembering their coffee order, she said. No, Amara said. But it doesn't hurt. They looked at each other for another moment. The particular look of people who understand that everything that needs to be said right now has been said and everything else will take years to say properly, and there will be time for that. Nadine went to the car. Amara stood in the doorway and watched the taillights go until they turned the corner and were gone. 3 months moved through Chicago the way Chicago months do, with abrupt weather and incremental news and the particular pace of a large city that cannot be significantly hurried regardless of what is happening in its legal infrastructure. Ossi's case moved faster than Voss had predicted and slower than Amara wanted. 2 of the council members accepted cooperation agreements in exchange for testimony, which Ossi had anticipated and structured for. A third resigned before subpoenas were served, which created its own chain of consequences and replacements and the grinding procedural noise of institutional accountability in motion. The Transit Authority connection turned out to have been moving money for 14 years across 17 shell structures, and the financial forensics alone, Osei told Jae-hyun in one of their periodic calls, was going to keep her office occupied for the better part of a year. Voss was indicted on 14 counts. His lawyers were exactly as good as his money suggested they would be. Ossi was exactly as prepared as Dae-sung's evidence suggested she would be. It was going to be a long case, and it was going to hold. Han pleaded out in week 6, which Jae-hyun learned from Min-kyu on a Wednesday and thought about for the rest of that week, about the specific arithmetic of a man who had made a choice 2 years ago that had eventually run out of options, and what the distance was between that and the choices Jae-hyun himself had made and was still making. He didn't reach a clean conclusion. He didn't expect to. The estate in Lincoln Park was sold. Not for strategic reasons, simply because it was the right size for a different kind of life than the one Jae-hyun was building, and maintaining it had started to feel like maintaining a set of habits that no longer fit the body wearing them. He moved to a smaller house in Logan Square that had good light in the mornings, and a kitchen that worked, and no guest suites with hospital-grade medical supplies staged in adjacent rooms. The dismantling of the organization's operational infrastructure happened in stages, managed by Min Kyu, with the systematic patience of a man who understood that some things needed to be taken apart slowly to avoid the specific kind of collapse that takes innocent structures with them. The legitimate holdings property, foundation assets, the parts that were actually clean, those were redirected. The parts that weren't were wound down in the way things in that world get wound down, carefully, specifically, with the full understanding of who was watching and what they were permitted to see. Min Kyu stayed through all of it. Jae-hyun never asked him directly whether he intended to, and Min Kyu never offered a formal declaration, and both of them understood that the question had been answered by the fact of continued presence. The North Halsted Station project began in month 2 with structural assessments, and the discovery that the main hall, despite the east floor collapse and the charge damage below, was substantially more intact than anyone had reasonable cause to hope. The clock on the north wall had survived. The ironwork of the upper gallery had survived, minus the section that had come down during the evacuation, which could be replicated. The bones of the building were sound. Jae-hyun hired an architect who had spent 15 years doing adaptive reuse work in underserved Chicago neighborhoods and who came to the first meeting with a folder of precedents and the specific manner of someone who had seen too many projects. Die in committee to waste time on anything other than what was actually possible. In the third meeting, Amara was there. She had not been invited. Specifically, Jae-hyun had mentioned the meeting date, and she had shown up, which he'd been hoping she would without saying so. She sat at the table and listened to the architect and asked questions that were precise and specific, and not about the building's aesthetics, but about its throughput. How many people? What services? What staff? What the realistic operational model looked like at year 1 versus year 3. The architect liked her immediately. You could see it in the way he turned toward her when she spoke. Afterward, walking out to the street, the November air sharp and clean, the city doing its evening wind thing. Jay, you're going to be involved in this. I'm already involved, she said. I meant formally. She looked at the building across the street. They were on the block adjacent to North Halsted Station. From where they stood, you could see the upper cornice of it over the intervening roofline. I haven't decided what I want to do after the diner, she said. I'm still figuring out the shape of the next thing. You spent 3 hours asking operational questions about a community shelter. I was curious, Amara. She looked at him, then at the building line. I need it to be mine, she said. Not someone built for me to inhabit. Not a way to be grateful. If I'm part of this, I'm part of it because I decided to be, and because I have a role that I actually fill. Not a title that... I know, he said. I'm not offering you a title. She looked at him steadily. I'm asking you what you want to build, he said, and whether you want to build it here. She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved down the street, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. I want a program for kids who aged out of placement, she said. Not babies, not little kids, the teenagers. The ones who turned 18 and got handed a folder and a bus pass, and nothing else. The ones who fall through the gap between child services and adult services and spend 3 years trying to become a person with no infrastructure for it. She looked at the cornice line. I know that gap. I know what's in it. Jae-hyun said nothing for a moment. That's what I want to build, she said. If I build anything. Then that's what we build, he said. She looked at him. Half, she said. What? Half the project, half the governance. Not my name on a door in a thing you fund. Half the decisions, half the authority, half the accountability when it goes wrong. She looked at him steadily. That's the only version of this where I'm actually part of it, instead of inside it. He held her gaze. The specific quality of Amara Winslow holding your gaze, which he had now experienced across multiple extremely high-stakes situations, was that it communicated with great clarity that she had already thought through what she was saying and was not going to be moved by counter-argument. Half, he said. Half. All right, he said. She looked at the cornice line one more time. Something moved across her face that was quieter than satisfaction and more permanent, the particular stillness of a person who has found the shape of what comes next and recognizes it. The clock at North Halsted Station was repaired on a Thursday in late November by a restoration specialist who had been working on historic timepieces for 31 years and who treated the frozen mechanism with the patient attention of someone who understood that things stopped by damage are not the same as things stopped by design. The hands moved for the first time in 18 years at 3:42 in the afternoon. Amara was not there for it. She found out from the project manager, who texted her a photograph, the clock face, the hands at 3:42, the interior light that was now functional, catching the ironwork of the repaired gallery railing above. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went back to the diner, because Harold had come in for his 4 o'clock decaf, and she was the one working the floor. She brought him his coffee. He looked up. "You look different," he said. "Same person," she said. He stirred his coffee. "Something settled," he said. Harold was 63 and had been sitting in that booth since before Amara came to work there, and he had the specific perceptiveness of people who have spent a lot of time being still and quiet in the same place. "Something settled," she agreed. He nodded, went back to his coffee. She went back to the floor. On a Saturday in December, Jae-hyun drove to the station not for a meeting, but because the light in the mornings had been interesting lately, the low winter angle of it, the way it came through the newly unboarded windows of the upper level and fell across the main hall floor in wide, pale strips. He had started coming, on Saturday mornings, before the construction crews arrived, to walk the space and think. He stood under the clock. He looked at the hands, at their current position moved now. Time passing, the building no longer frozen. Split. He thought about his father standing in the station 18 years ago with 2 frightened children and 2 red umbrellas and a plan that was built on the assumption that the right person would eventually be in the right place at the right time. He thought about the specific audacity of that building. Something on that kind of faith, not in outcomes, not in systems, but in the particular gamble that the thread would hold long enough. He thought about Amara pressing the pendant into his hand in the rain and saying, "Don't let the man with the blue ring find me," and the way his father's careful architecture had chosen him for that moment, not because he was the best version of what was needed, but because he was present and he was carrying what his father had given him, even without knowing he was carrying it. He stood under the clock and looked at the hall around him, the scaffolding where the gallery railing was being restored, the new window glass waiting in stacked panels along the east wall, the floor of the main hall clean now, the detritus of 18 empty years removed, and he felt the specific weight of something that was not absolution, and was not redemption, and was not any of the words that get used when people talk about men trying to become different from what they were. It was more like the feeling of beginning, not clean beginning, not blank slate beginning with the full understanding of what the ground you were building on was made of, and choosing to build anyway, and accepting that the building would always be partly in conversation with the ground beneath it. He heard footsteps at the north entrance. Amara came in with her coat collar up against the December air, carrying 2 coffees in paper cups, moving with the easy pace of someone whose wound was fully healed and whose body was back to being a reliable instrument. She looked around the hall as she walked toward him, taking stock the way she always did, reading the space, noting the changes since the last time. She handed him a coffee. He took it. They stood under the clock for a moment without speaking, looking at the hall around them and what it was in the process of becoming. "Harold thinks I look different," she said. "You do," he said. "Same person," she said. "Different weight," he said. She considered that. "Yes," she said. "Different weight." She looked up at the clock, at the hands moving. He looked at her, looking at it. "Give me a name," he said. She looked at him. The words, his first words to her, in the rain, in the headlights, split the stomach question he'd asked. When she was bleeding and barely conscious and was trying to understand what he'd caught, sat between them with the specific weight of the distance traveled since. She held his gaze. "Amara Winslow," she said. Not the same as the first time she'd said it, or rather the same name and a completely different thing, said now from the inside of it, from the chosen center of it, with the full knowledge of everything that name had been built on, and everything she had decided to build on top of that. He nodded. She looked back at the clock. Around them, the station that had been frozen for 18 years moved forward in the December light, and the city outside went on being a city, enormous and indifferent, and full of people carrying things they didn't yet have the words for, and the two of them stood in it with their coffee, going cold, and the hall filling slowly with the ordinary irreversible passage of time. And